In 1991, Whitney Houston stood on the field at Super Bowl 25 and sang the national anthem. Not performed it, not delivered it. Sang it the way nobody had ever sung it before, and nobody has sung it since. In the middle of a war, in front of 79,000 people in the stadium and over 100 million watching at home. And she made it sound easy, like the notes had been sitting there for 200 years, waiting for the right voice to come along and set them free. That performance was so perfect that it was released as a single. A recording of the national anthem that charted on the Billboard Hot 100, one of the rare instances of the anthem becoming a commercial hit. Because it wasn't just a performance, it was proof that a human voice could do something so flawless, so effortless, so beyond what anyone expected, that it stopped being music and became a moment. And that moment became a cage. Because from that point forward, every time Whitney Houston opened her mouth, the world expected that. Every performance, every interview, every public appearance was measured against the version of Whitney that made the national anthem sound like a prayer she'd been rehearsing her whole life. And the distance between that expectation and the reality of being a human being with a human body and a human voice that ages and struggles and breaks was the space where every struggle was magnified. Let's do an icon recall. If this is your first time here, we look at the icons everyone celebrates and ask what it actually cost them to become that. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This is not another video that reduces Whitney's story to drugs or Bobby Brown. The internet has told those stories 1,000 times, and they've been told in a way that usually makes Whitney the cautionary tale and everyone else the audience. This is about something different. This is about what happens when your greatest gift becomes your only identity, when the thing that makes you extraordinary is the same thing that traps you. Because Whitney Houston didn't just have a voice, she was the voice. The industry called her that. The media called her that. And when the voice started to change, the world didn't know what to do with the woman who was still standing behind it. To understand what happened to Whitney, you have to understand what she was born into. Whitney Elizabeth Houston arrived on August 9, 1963, in Newark, New Jersey, into what might be the most stacked musical family tree in American history. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a celebrated gospel singer who performed backup for Aretha Franklin and Elvis Presley. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick. Her godmother was Aretha Franklin herself. Music wasn't something Whitney chose. It was the air she breathed. She was singing in church by 5, soloing by 11, and backing up Chaka Khan on professional recordings by 15. And from the earliest moments, the voice was the thing. Not her songwriting, not her stage presence, not her personality, the voice. It was identified early as something extraordinary, a rich, velvety instrument with an almost operatic power that could shift from a whisper to a belt that filled an arena without ever sounding like it was trying. Cissy Houston recognized it. Clive Davis, the legendary head of Arista Records, recognized it when he saw Whitney perform at a nightclub and signed her at 19. And the entire marketing strategy for Whitney's career was built around one premise: this voice is the most perfect instrument in popular music. Present it accordingly, and for a while the strategy worked beyond anything anyone could have imagined. Whitney's self-titled debut album, released in 1985, spent 14 weeks at number 1. It was the longest-running number 1 debut by a female artist at the time. Her second album, Whitney, generated 4 consecutive number 1 singles. Between her first 2 albums, she released 7 consecutive number 1 hits, breaking a record previously held by the Beatles and the Bee Gees. 7 consecutive number 1s from a woman who was 24 years old. And then came The Bodyguard and I Will Always Love You. Whitney found a scale and emotional force inside Dolly Parton's ballad that transformed how an entire generation heard it. It stayed at number 1 for 14 weeks. The soundtrack became the best-selling movie soundtrack of all time. Whitney was nominated for and won Grammys for Album of the Year, Record of the Year, and Best Female Pop Vocal Performance. She wasn't just the biggest singer in the world. She was the standard by which every other female vocalist would be measured for the next 2 decades. But here's where the story turns. The thing about being called the voice is that it sounds like a compliment, and it is. But it's also a reduction. Being the voice didn't only limit Whitney. It gave her a level of reach, power, and cultural permanence almost no singer will ever experience. The tragedy is that the identity worked so well commercially that there was little incentive for anyone around her to ask whether it was becoming too small for the person inside it. It takes a full, complex human being and collapses her into a single attribute. Whitney Houston wasn't just a voice. She was a mother, an actress, a producer, a businesswoman, a person with fears and desires and contradictions, and bad days. But the world didn't want all of that. The world wanted the voice. The world wanted perfection, every single time. And perfection is not a sustainable product, not from a human body, not from vocal cords that are, at the end of the day, two small folds of tissue inside a throat that is subject to the same biological laws as everyone else's. I remember the first time I heard Whitney Houston, really heard her. It was "I Will Always Love You," obviously, because for a lot of people in my generation, that's the entry point. But what I remember isn't the big notes, it's the beginning. The first 45 seconds where she sings with no music at all, just a voice in an empty room. And even as a kid, I could feel that something about that voice was different from everything else I'd ever heard. It didn't sound like a person trying to sing well. It sounded like singing was the most natural thing this person could do, like breathing, but louder. And that's the cruel part, because the more natural something looks, the more the audience forgets it takes effort. The more effortless Whitney made it seem, the more the world assumed it would always be that way, that she'd always be able to walk up to a microphone and produce something flawless, that the voice was permanent, guaranteed, hers to give whenever the world asked for it. But the voice was already changing. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, audiences could hear that Whitney's voice was changing. Years of demanding performances, smoking, substance use, and the ordinary wear placed on a human instrument had altered the sound. The demanding schedule, the constant touring, the expectation to deliver at peak capacity every single night was taking a physical toll that the substances were making worse. But Whitney was not only fighting the expectations placed on her voice, her private life was becoming another public performance. In 1992, Whitney married Bobby Brown. The public turned the marriage into a second identity and assigned it to her as completely as it had assigned her the first. Before Bobby, Whitney was America's sweetheart, polished, perfect, safe. After Bobby, Whitney was reckless, wild. A cautionary tale in the making. The truth was probably more complicated than either version, but the public doesn't do complicated. The public does categories, and Whitney went from one box to another overnight. But here's what most people miss about the Bobby Brown era. Whatever initially drew Whitney to Bobby, the relationship placed her beside someone who represented nearly everything her polished public image was not. Around him, the carefully maintained division between Whitney the product and Whitney the person became harder to sustain. The problem is, the world didn't want Whitney the person. The world wanted Whitney the product. And when the product started showing cracks, the response wasn't compassion, it was content. The tabloids fed on her marriage. The paparazzi fed on her decline. The interview clips became viral moments for all the wrong reasons. The substance use that had reportedly begun in the late 1980s accelerated through the 1990s and 2000s, making everything worse. The physical damage to her voice compounded with the chemical damage to her body. And the world watched it happen in real time. The 2002 interview with Diane Sawyer became one of the most replayed moments of Whitney's career. Not because of what she said, because of how she looked compared to how the world remembered her. The woman sitting in that chair and the woman who sang the national anthem at the Super Bowl were separated by barely a decade, but the distance between them felt infinite. And that comparison is the engine of everything that went wrong, because the world never compared Whitney to other singers. The world compared Whitney to Whitney. The 1991 Whitney, the bodyguard Whitney, the version that didn't seem to require effort. And every time the current Whitney fell short of the past Whitney, the reaction wasn't empathy. It was disappointment, confusion, or worse, entertainment. But the cage doesn't open just because the singer is tired. In 2009, Whitney attempted a comeback. She released I Look to You and went on tour. And the tour was where the gap between expectation and reality became impossible to ignore. At some shows, the voice was there, diminished, older, rougher, but present. At others, the performances fell apart. Audiences reportedly booed. Some walked out. One critic wrote something that captures the entire tragedy in a single observation. What's hard to give up is the dream of painless perfection that the young Houston represented. That line is the whole episode. Because what was lost wasn't Whitney's talent. Even in her final years, there were moments where the old power broke through. Flashes where you could hear the voice underneath everything that had happened to it. But flashes weren't enough. The world didn't want flashes. The world wanted the whole thing, all the time, on demand. And the distance between what the world wanted and what Whitney could still give was the space where her identity collapsed. When your greatest quality becomes the only quality people see, losing it doesn't just mean losing a skill. It means losing yourself, because you were never given permission to be anything else. Even her successful acting career remained secondary in the public imagination to the voice. Whitney the mother was tabloid material. Whitney the person was invisible. Only Whitney the voice mattered. And when the voice changed, the world didn't say, "That's okay, you're still Whitney." The world said, "What happened to Whitney?" As if the woman and the instrument were the same thing. As if one couldn't exist without the other. Here's why this matters to you. You probably have a version of this in your own life. The thing you're known for. The quality people praise you for. The skill that became your identity so gradually that you didn't notice until it was the only thing anyone associated with you. Maybe you're the smart one, the funny one, the reliable one, the strong one, the one who always has the answer, the one who never falls apart. And as long as you can deliver that quality consistently, the world loves you for it. But what happens on the day you can't? What happens when the smart one doesn't know the answer? When the strong one needs help? When the reliable one drops the ball? Does the world give you grace? Or does the world look at you the way it looked at Whitney on that 2009 tour? With disappointment that has nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with who they decided you were supposed to be. Most people never get asked who they are underneath the thing they're known for. And most people never volunteer it, because volunteering it feels like admitting the thing they're known for isn't enough. It feels like weakness, like failure, like the beginning of the end. Whitney Houston lived inside that trap at a scale most of us will never experience. But the trap itself is ordinary. It's one of the most common ways people lose themselves. Not through drama, not through scandal. Through the slow, quiet process of becoming so identified with one quality that the rest of you stops getting air. On February 11th, 2012, Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. She was 48 years old. The coroner's report stated that the cause of death was accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. She was in town for Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy Gala, the same event where her career had been celebrated so many times before. The world mourned her the way the world mourns its voices, with the greatest hits on repeat, with social media posts that said, "Rip the voice," with tributes that praised the instrument and mourned its silence. And in a way, even the mourning proved the point, because even in death, the conversation was about the voice, not the woman. The gift, not the person carrying it. Whitney Houston didn't just teach us about music. She taught us what happens when the world loves your gift more than it loves you. And the silent price of perfection is this. The better you are at something, the harder it becomes to be seen as anything else. The voice is gone now, but the woman who carried it deserved to be more than the sound she made. And maybe the lesson isn't about Whitney at all. Maybe it's about the way we treat the people in our own lives who are extraordinary at one thing. Do we let them be human, or do we only love the performance? Because that question is the difference between admiration and a cage. And most of the time, the person inside the cage is the last one to realize the door was never open. If this changed how you see Whitney Houston, let me know in the comments. And if there's another icon you want remembered this way, not just for what they achieved, but for what it cost them, drop their name below. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This is Recall Icon. Thank you for watching.